Sometimes the truth lies not in fantasy, but in what's recorded by cameras, archives, and eyewitnesses, and yet remains inexplicable. Dozens of strange objects, traces, signals, and discoveries have been found around the world, baffling even scientists. These riddles are real. They can be seen, touched, photographed. But no one can say for sure what they mean. Today, we'll tell you about the 30 most disturbing and mysterious riddles, each of which has a face, and it's staring right back at us. Human columns in the Aokigahara Forest. The Aokigahara Forest spreads out at the foot of Mount Fuji like the aged shadow of an ancient volcano where neither birds nor wind can be heard. Locals call it the Sea of Trees, and for good reason. The dense undergrowth is so thick it muffles even one's own breathing. Tourists often get lost in these thickets, and compasses behave strangely. The needles jump as if something is interfering with the magnetic fields. But the most unsettling thing here isn't even nature itself, but a presence felt by almost everyone who ventures deeper than comfortably allowed. Aokigahara's fame has long been linked to tragic stories. The forest has earned the ominous reputation of Suicide Forest, becoming the site of hundreds of deaths that Japanese police prefer to keep quiet about. But there's one discovery known only to a few. In 1998, during a quiet field survey, a small group of volunteers discovered what journalists would later call human columns. These were bodies, 3 at the time, not lying down as one would expect, but standing upright, as if frozen in place. Their feet sank into the moss, their faces were turned in one direction, and their bodies maintained an unnatural balance without any support. Photographs of this discovery quickly disappeared from public sources, but surviving copies circulated through anonymous forums and private archives still send shivers down their spines. They reveal half-decomposed figures covered in fungus, their hair matted into tight tufts, and their hands seemingly clenched in convulsions. But the most important thing is the expression on their faces. Not suffering, not pain, but emptiness. As if all 3 died suddenly, but not of their own free will. The police tried to explain this as the result of the bodies settling after death. They simply hadn't been found in time, and the position was accidental. But even forensic experts acknowledged that such upright posture was impossible without artificial intervention or abnormal mummification conditions. But there's no wind in this forest, and there are no simple explanations. 3 years later, in 2001, another crew, this one a television crew, filming a documentary about Japanese anomalies, reported a similar discovery. 2 figures, one of which was almost completely mummified, stood with their backs to a tree, not touching it. The photographer, by his own account, lost consciousness a minute after approaching the figures. The camera captured only one frame, blurred with a half-tone, but with a clearly discernible silhouette. The authorities chose not to make any official statements. But since then, dozens of cameras have been installed in the forest, some of which point deep into the thicket beyond the hiking trails. Their data is not publicly available. What they record is unknown. Some researchers believe the forest literally eats time and orientation, forcing people to lose their will and return to the same place until their strength completely fails. But even the most daring of them cannot explain how bodies can stand without falling, and why some are found in the same position, as if an invisible hand had positioned them facing some center, something invisible to the average person. There are unconfirmed theories about ancient underground caverns beneath Aokigahara, where gravity is altered. There are theories about religious rituals from the Edo period. There are theories that the forest itself chooses those who remain. But the facts speak for themselves. Such photographs exist, and they are not reconstructions. These are real bodies, frozen, witnesses to something we are not yet able to understand. Sarcophagus of the Racer in Guatemala. In the mid-20th century, archaeologists discovered a stone sarcophagus at the summit of the ancient Temple 6 in Tikal, one of the largest Mayan cities lost in the jungles of Guatemala. It was hidden under rubble in a closed underground chamber, darkened for over 1,000 years. But the most important discovery lay not in the structure itself, but inside, on the lid of the sarcophagus itself. A human figure was carved there, surrounded by a complex system of lines, geometric elements, tubes, and symbols reminiscent of something mechanical. His body is arched, his legs raised, his hands seem to be holding levers, and beneath him is a structure that many researchers have called a cockpit. This man appears to be driving a machine, and the sarcophagus itself is not a coffin, but a capsule. Later, in archaeological circles, it was nicknamed the Racer. The image was first published in National Geographic magazine in 1958. Controversy erupted almost immediately. Some claimed it depicted a journey to the afterlife, typical of Mayan culture. But others, including engineers and astronomers, claimed they saw a diagram of the controls of a flying machine. The proportions and symmetry of the design were striking, especially the exhaust flow beneath the cockpit, consisting of parallel flames, like compressed gas. It flowed downward and backward, like in jet engines. The sarcophagus's photograph became a sensation. It was analyzed by NASA technicians, ancient civilization researchers, and popular documentary filmmakers. But even decades later, there's no consensus on what the lid depicts. Mayanists continue to speak of the ascent of the soul, but also acknowledge that a similar style is unique to Mayan culture. This image is unique, both in its anatomy and the complexity of its relief. The figure, carved in stone, lies on its back, and beneath it are layers resembling engine structures. The helmet-like outline of its head, belts, intertwined pipes, systems, and even what resemble elements of the hull are clearly depicted. Viewed without cultural context, without knowing that this is Mayan, one gets the illusion that we are looking at an operator in a control capsule, perhaps even in a crash or launch. Inside the sarcophagus, scientists found the remains of an adult male, approximately 45 years old. He wore a gold headband adorned with symbols of corn and stars. A finely carved mask covered his face, and stone tools lay beneath his hands. Everything pointed to an important figure, likely a ruler. But whoever he was, his tomb was unlike any other. Neither before nor after the discoveries in Temple 6 were there any sarcophagi decorated in a similar style. Later, reliefs with vaguely similar symbols were found in two other locations in Guatemala, El Mirador and Calakmul. But they were far simpler, and more importantly, they lacked any machine-like logic. Only the Racer sarcophagus contains a composition in which every line, according to engineers, seems to be subordinated to a technical function. The exhaust, the handles, the ceilings, even the body position, tensed with bent legs, is like that of the pilot in the module. Today, the sarcophagus can be seen in photographs in museums. It is among the most enigmatic artifacts of Central America. And although official science explains everything through Mayan mythology, more and more researchers are returning to the question, why was a single ruler buried with symbolism so similar to technology? Was this a random artistic experiment or evidence that we don't know something about this civilization? One thing is clear, the Racer sarcophagus is real. It can be touched, examined, and photographed. It is not a figment of the imagination, and what it depicts has something resonant even in our technological age. Abandoned mirrors of the Gulag in Siberia. Deep in the taiga of eastern Siberia, in the permafrost zone, on the border of Yakutia and the Krasnoyarsk territory, lie the ruins of one of the most remote and forgotten camps of Stalin's Gulag era. Official archives are silent about it, and its coordinates aren't marked on regular maps, but satellite images show a strange grid of rectangular structures overgrown with moss and snow. Among these ruins is one particularly strange spot, which researchers call the Mirror Station. At first glance, they appear to be simply rusty frames set at an angle. But if you look closer, you can see the remains of metal surfaces polished to a mirror shine. Some of them still reflect light, despite decades of exposure to the open sky. These mirrors were once part of a complex engineering structure that local elders call a sun trap. The first photographs of these structures appeared in 2003 when a group of cavers from Novosibirsk set out on an expedition in search of old camps. One of the participants noticed that even at sunset, when the entire forest was immersed in blue shadow, one of the slopes continued to glow brightly. The source of the light turned out to be not in the sky, but on the ground. A metal shard gnawed at the horizon, reflecting the last rays, as if deliberately angled. Upon further inspection, it turned out there were dozens of such reflective frames. They were staggered, oriented at the same angle, and most were oriented directly southwest. When the sun sets, they create a light corridor effect, which you can walk through without turning on a flashlight. Only once a day. Only for 3 minutes, only at the end of winter. At other times, not a single reflection. Why are they there? Who put them there? And most importantly, why? According to one rare hypothesis, this was an experiment in light therapy for prisoners suffering from polar depression. In conditions where the sun doesn't shine for weeks, engineers allegedly attempted to direct the sun's rays to specific points. Perhaps a building housing the sick or dying. This theory is partially supported by the discovery of concrete platforms in the center of the mirror field, which bear traces of anchors. But there's another theory, far more disturbing. According to the diaries of one of the guards found in a hiding place under a chimney, this system was used for psychological control. The entries describe a solitary confinement cell where prisoners were placed for 3 days, without light, without movement, without sound, and only on the 3rd day were they allowed to see light reflected through a system of mirrors. At the moment of reflection, according to the author, most people began to burst into tears or convulsions. How this worked is unclear, but the entries end with the statement that the project was closed for moral and ethical reasons. These mirrors have never been dismantled. They still stand. Some have sunk into the ground, others knocked down by fallen trees. But dozens remain. They can be seen in drone photographs published by independent research groups. And the most daring tourists claim that on certain nights, even without sun, one of the mirror corners begins to glow from within, as if reflecting not light, but something else. Science has yet to provide an explanation. The archives are closed. Not a single government report mentions this station, but the mirrors are there, and they continue to reflect. Skeletons with elongated skulls in Paracas. On the southern coast of Peru, amid the desert plains of the Paracas Peninsula, in 1928, Peruvian archaeologist Julio Tello made one of the most disturbing discoveries in the history of South American archaeology. Deep in caves hidden in the desert floor, his team discovered numerous human remains, buried in tissue with hair, skin, and nails preserved. But the most striking thing was the shape of the skulls. They were elongated, extended upward and backward, a shape not seen in any culture of the region. They would later be called Paracas skulls. The finds were remarkably well preserved. Thanks to the dry climate, mummification occurred naturally, and photographs taken as early as the 1930s are still published in scientific journals and online archives. These skulls have become the subject of dozens of studies. But the main mystery remains. Why are they like this? And most importantly, who were these people? In most cultures around the world, elongated skulls were created artificially by tightly binding them in infancy. African, Native American, and Australian tribes were familiar with this practice. But the Paracas skulls were different from those artificially deformed. There was something about them that shouldn't have been there. First, the volume. The skulls were 25% larger than normal human skulls. Second, the structure. The normal human skull consists of 3 plates, the frontal and 2 parietal. Some of the Paracas skulls lacked sagittal sutures, the line dividing the parietal bones. Visually, they appeared solid, as if cast. X-rays taken in the 2000s revealed abnormalities in the structure of cranial sutures, bone density, and even the distribution of blood vessels. Researchers debated whether these were rare congenital anomalies or the result of another form of development unknown to us. Hypotheses have been put forward regarding genetic mutations, even admixture with extinct hominids who left no other trace. Some have gone even further, suggesting an extraterrestrial origin. But the scientific community remains cautious. There is too little data. In 2012, the first genetic analyses were conducted. Researchers obtained DNA fragments from the bone marrow of 2 skulls. The initial results caused a sensation. The haplogroups did not match known lineages of South American populations. One sample even showed a connection to the Black Sea region, millennia ago and oceans far away. However, this data was not officially recognized, as the analysis methodology and sample storage conditions fell far short of academic standards. Nevertheless, photographs, genetic fragments, and preserved mummified heads from Paracas became part of the greatest mystery in Latin American archaeology. One of the skulls on display in a private museum in Ica continues to stir controversy. It has red hair. This is almost impossible for a region where dark-haired peoples lived for millennia. Moreover, the hair is not dyed or artificial. It grew from preserved hair follicles. This means either people from another continent visited the area, or there was a lineage that left no other traces in the region's genetic makeup. There are also ritualistic aspects. Among the fabrics in which the skulls were wrapped, symbols resembling stars, circles, and repeating spirals were found. Some believe these people occupied a special position, perhaps priests, keepers of knowledge, or something more. The Paracas skulls are officially recognized as an archaeological phenomenon. They're not mystical, not mythical. They exist. They're on display in museums. And anyone can look at them, at the bones stretching skyward, perhaps hiding a story we haven't even begun to understand. The burnt-out library of Kisangani. In the heart of Central Africa, in the city of Kisangani on the banks of the Congo River, there stands an ancient building that, until recently, remained virtually unknown outside the region. It was a library built in the late 19th century by Belgian missionaries, an unremarkable 2-story structure of clay and stone with a wooden roof surrounded by palm trees and abandoned workshops. There was no sign on the door, and the keys to the locks were kept by an elderly caretaker who lived nearby. And yet, this very place became the source of one of the strangest and most frighteningly inexplicable stories in modern Africa. In March 2007, a massive fire broke out in Kisangani. It was caused by electrical wiring in the building across the street. The flames spread to several buildings, including the old library, which burned completely within hours. The roof collapsed, wooden beams crumbled, and windows were shattered. Witnesses said the fire was so powerful that it was impossible to remain inside, even in protective clothing. The temperature exceeded 600 degrees Celsius. Anything made of wood or paper would have been reduced to ashes. But 2 days later, when firefighters returned to survey the damage, they discovered something impossible. In the center of the former reading room, amidst charred walls and a black floor, stood an iron cabinet, slightly askew but intact. Its door, according to eyewitnesses, was barely ajar. Inside were about 30 leather-bound folios, most written in a language they couldn't immediately identify. And most importantly, the pages were intact. No charring, no traces of moisture, not even the smell of smoke. Photographs of the books went viral in academic circles. These weren't modern editions, but texts dating from various periods, from the early 13th century to the late 19th century. Some were written in Old French, others in unknown Bantu dialects. But the strangest discovery was a scroll covered in incomprehensible symbols resembling a mixture of Arabic script and hieroglyphs. The scroll's paper had a papyrus texture, but its origin has not yet been determined. Scientists from the University of Kinshasa, invited to conduct an expert examination, suggested that the books might have been protected by some kind of hermetically sealed fireproof container. But the library's security guard insisted that the building had no such systems. The bookcase was old, with a regular door. Furthermore, everything around it had been completely destroyed by fire. Even the metal shelves had been reduced to dark dust. So why did these particular books survive? Some locals, especially the elderly, claim the library was a safe place. Supposedly, in the early 20th century, texts of power were brought here, rescued from colonial raids by the remote Kusai tribe, about whom almost nothing is known today. Legend has it that these books were hand-copied over invisible fire, a metaphor that has never been fully interpreted. The tomes are now kept in separate climate capsules, and only 2 have been deciphered. One is a treatise on astronomy, containing descriptions of the lunar phases and circles of shadow crossing the equator. The second is a collection of prophecies, written in the first person, describing 3 splittings of time and a city turning inward. What exactly survived in this cabinet and why? No one can say. The fire destroyed everything around it. But these texts, it's as if they didn't notice the fire, as if someone or something prevented them from disappearing. Mikhailovsky Triangle in the swamps of Russia, at the junction of the Vologda and Kostroma regions, in an area where dense forests give way to impassable swamps, lies one of Russia's strangest and least known geometric anomalies. It's called the St. Michael's Triangle, an area of approximately 40 kilometers, on the surface of which satellite images reveal smooth, clearly defined lines forming an equilateral triangle. These lines are visible only from above. They are indistinguishable on the ground. No relief, no buildings, no signs of intervention. But they are there, and the closer scientists look, the more questions arise. The shape was first noticed in 1991 when Soviet topographers were analyzing photographs for geodetic purposes. One of the engineers noticed that the swampy area had an anomalous symmetry. He traced straight lines along the subtle transitions in the texture of the marsh vegetation and was amazed. 3 sides converged at a nearly perfect 60-degree angle, forming a geometrically perfect shape the size of a large city. Inside, there was nothing, only flat, uniform marsh vegetation, without hills, bodies of water, or traces of human activity. A decade later, in 2003, civilian satellite images confirmed the triangle's existence. The difference in spectral data between the line and the background is 4 to 6 NDVI units, an index that measures the health and density of vegetation. Simply put, plants along the lines grow differently than the surrounding area. Meanwhile, the soil, according to the probing data, has the same acidity and density, ruling out a natural boundary such as a bank or riverbed. Locals had known about the place for a long time. They called it the humming swamp, not because of the sound, but because they said equipment would make strange noises when passing through the area. Compasses malfunctioned. Radios picked up a noise reminiscent of the rustling of voices. But official documents listed the area as inaccessible and undeveloped. Attempts to drain part of the swamp in the 1970s ended in failure. Pumps broke, equipment sank, and workers complained of an oppressive feeling and headaches. In 2014, a private research team, geophysicists, radio engineers, and cartographers deployed there. They spent 3 days at the triangle's edge and collected some strange data. First, a 1.2-degree increase in local temperature was observed within the triangle, even though the swamps should cool the air. Secondly, electromagnetic measurements revealed rhythmic pulses with a frequency of approximately 17 Hz, a range close to the human brain frequency. One of the expedition members claimed to have experienced several spatial displacements. A brief sensation as if his body had slightly rotated even though he was not moving. The strangest thing happened on the night between Friday and Saturday. A camera mounted on a stand inside the triangle captured a bright flash of light emanating from the soil itself. The light lasted less than a second. But at that moment, the clock on the instrument panel was off by exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds, simultaneously across all recordings. After that, the electronics began malfunctioning, and the expedition urgently abandoned the area. No government agency has offered an explanation. Geologists have claimed the shape could be the result of natural moss growth along underground cracks. But such symmetry is impossible in nature, yet the triangle remains. It can be seen on Google Earth. The coordinates are not hidden, but if you zoom in, the detail disappears. It's as if something in this place refuses to be seen up close. Atlantis Ridge near the Azores. At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, near the Azores, lies one of the most controversial geological formations on the planet. It's variously called the Central Atlantic Rise, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, or, as proponents of sunken civilizations like to say, the Ridge of Atlantis. It stretches for thousands of kilometers. Its shape is remarkably linear, and in the area between the Azores and the Madeira Plateau, this structure rises closer to the surface than anywhere else in the ocean. It is here that observations are concentrated that form the basis of one of the most enigmatic themes in 20th century oceanography. Since the late 19th century, explorers laying cables between continents have reported strange anomalies on the seabed in this sector. Flat areas that appear leveled, smooth ledges resembling walls, sharp depth changes, and debris that seemed impossible to be created by nature. In 1949, the British vessel HMS Challenger the Sekou discovered a strange sight at a depth of approximately 3,000 meters, almost rectangular in shape, with sharp angles and a dense base that jutted out from the overall structure of the seafloor. These coordinates were later dubbed Zone E, and they remain controversial to this day. In 1971, an American submersible, descending into this area, transmitted visual data revealing structures resembling man-made terraces. One of the researchers, Professor William Donovan, stated in a report that these formations are consistent with the geometry of land structures known from ancient civilizations. His findings caused a scandal, but the photographs remained. Today, these images can be found in NOAA archives and open geophysical databases. They show underwater slopes interrupted by nearly horizontal ledges, resembling roads or platform foundations. Some sections look like stairs descending into shadow. Others resemble linear walls, seemingly created by humans rather than by volcanic activity. Oceanographers claim these are tectonic processes, cracks, faults, and underwater uplifts. But at the same time, in the center of the region, between coordinates 35 degrees north and 28 degrees west, lies the most controversial feature, a vast plateau barely submerged. Its surface is so smooth that some researchers have proposed the theory that it was a former island submerged after a catastrophic earthquake or volcanic upheaval. Plato, in his texts, mentioned Atlantis as an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, larger than Libya and Asia combined, which disappeared in a single day and a single night. For many, these words sounded like a metaphor, but the area near the Azores fits this description by all accounts. It is located to the west. The Strait of Gibraltar bears traces of previous uplifts and is located at the intersection of tectonic plates. In 2011, 2 underwater earthquakes were recorded in this area, both with magnitudes greater than 6. Uplift and subsidence are common here. Some proponents of the Atlantis hypothesis argue that part of the ridge once rose above the water and formed land, perhaps an archipelago or a single massif. This is supported by the discovery of pumice and other volcanic rocks characteristic of underwater islands over the past 20 years. They indicate that there may have once been land here, submerged after a series of seismic events. There's no convincing evidence. but there's also no complete refutation. And most importantly, satellite maps of the ocean floor confirm beneath the water, right off the Azores, lies something large, smooth, and strikingly symmetrical. Too perfect to be attributed to chance. Abandoned ice church in Iceland. Hidden away in northern Iceland, in a region rarely visited by tourists and covered in lava fields, lies a ruined building known locally as Ískaldarkirkja, the ice church. It's not listed in guidebooks, and it's not marked on maps, but the coordinates are passed around by word of mouth, mostly among climbers, geologists, and the odd loner fascinated by icy anomalies. Those who've been there all say the same thing. It's always cold inside this church. Not just cold, frosty. Even in summer, even at midday, even at 10 degrees Celsius outside. The building stands on the slope of an extinct volcano in a place where weak geysers and steam pockets emerge from the ground. This circumstance alone makes the existence of permanent ice within impossible. But the church exists. It is a small Gothic structure with a high roof, narrow windows, and a partially collapsed entrance arch. It was built in the mid-19th century by Danish missionaries trying to bring Christianity to remote farming communities. Judging by the records found, the church operated for only a few years. Then it was abandoned. And here's where things get strange. The first reports of the ice effect appeared back in the 1930s. A geologist surveying the area reported that water froze on his boots when he entered the building. The walls inside were covered in frost. The ceiling was a crust of ice. The floor was a glass-smooth slab of ice. Outside, everything was dry, and the snow had long since melted. In 1967, Icelandic radio published an interview with a farmer who once hid in this church from a storm. He claimed the cold inside was unbearable, his breath turned to steam, and the walls made a cracking sound like ice breathing. He stood there for less than 30 minutes, but suffered frostbite on his fingers. In the 1980s, a group of students at Reykjavik University attempted to measure the temperature inside and outside. The results stunned everyone. On a day when the outside temperature was around 12 degrees Celsius, thermometers inside the church showed -4 degrees Celsius. No cooling systems, no wind, no shade, eternal cold. Scientists have suggested that the cause may be a geothermal inversion, a rare natural phenomenon in which hot air descends, displacing cold air upward. But no one has been able to explain why this only occurs inside the walls, or why the ice crust persists, even in August. When they attempted to install storage heaters in the church in 1995, they burned out within a minute. The temperature remained unchanged. Today, the building is considered dangerous. It's unguarded, but warning signs are posted nearby. Inside, there are cracks in the walls, ice buildup on the arches, and a strange, muffled sound, like a drop of water falling on ice somewhere deep beneath the floor. Photos taken by tourists confirm this. They show frost, steam from the breath, and frozen hair. Some of the photos have a strange feature, a slight distortion of perspective, as if the space inside the church is warped. There's a theory that this place was built on an ancient ice pocket buried deep within the Earth's crust. Others talk about underground gas flows altering the pressure. But there are also those who believe the cold isn't physical, that it's connected to what remained in this place after the church emptied. It wasn't the people who left. Something displaced them, and the ice is merely its breath. A window that has not closed for 100 years. Hidden away in the Bavarian hills near the town of Oberau, an ancient Benedictine monastery conceals one of Europe's strangest architectural mysteries. In the southern wall of the monastery complex, facing the courtyard, stands a tall, arched window covered with plain glass, not stained glass. Its construction is simple, with a wooden frame and iron hinges. But since the early 20th century, this window has been impossible to close. Not in winter, not during hurricanes, not even when the monks tried to board it up. It always opens. The story began in January 1923 when, according to monastery chronicles, one of the young novices was found dead on the floor of the prayer hall. He lay right beneath this very window. The cause of death was never determined. One theory suggested a heart attack, another an accident. But soon after his funeral, the monks noticed something odd. The window, always closed at night, was suddenly wide open in the morning, even though all the keys were still there. At first, they thought it was a draft or a faulty frame. They tried replacing the frame, but it didn't help. More than 100 years have passed since then, and not a single attempt to keep this window closed has been successful. The monks have strengthened the hinges, replaced the glass, installed metal bolts, even coated the frame with a special sealant resin. And yet it still opens. Sometimes with a soft click, sometimes with a sharp thud, as if someone were forcibly pushing it open from the inside. But inside, it's empty. Always, photographs of the window are in the monastery archives. They show the shutter always open, against a backdrop of ancient stonework. At times, it was boarded up with plywood. One year, they even tried to brick it up, but the mortar wouldn't set. A week later, the stones began to crack and fall off. The shutter swung open again. Since then, it hasn't been touched. It remains as is. The most disturbing developments began in the 1970s, when the monastery was temporarily closed for restoration, and historians studying the walls discovered scratched inscriptions in a niche beneath this window. They were written in various handwritings, dating from different eras, in German, Latin, and even Old French. Translations are fragmentary. He did not leave. This is his passage. Only from here does he breathe. No one knows exactly what these phrases mean. But in an old lithograph from 1782 depicting the courtyard, this window is already depicted slightly open, unlike all the others. Scientists brought in 2006 found no rational explanation. Air pressure was normal. Temperature fluctuations were inconsistent with the sash's behavior. There were no drafts. Geologists found no voids or deformations beneath the building, and the hinges and frame remained stable. Yet the window continued to open. The monks stopped fighting. Now, at the foot of the wall, beneath this window, stands a wooden bench. Some claim that when sitting on it, you can hear someone sighing from a direction where there shouldn't be any sound. After all, there's only a garden outside. Others claim that even in the hottest weather, an icy air wafts from this very window. The window never became a tourist attraction. It remained a part of the monastery's life, a strange reminder of something unfinished. And although no one knows what happened that night 100 years ago, everyone who was there leaves with the same feeling, that the window doesn't open outward, it opens inward. Fresco the Astronaut in the Cathedral of Salamanca. In the heart of the ancient Spanish city of Salamanca stands a massive cathedral built in the Gothic Renaissance style, one of those places where stone literally holds its own over the centuries. The old cathedral was founded in the 12th century, and the new cathedral in the 16th, with grand portal arches adorned with hundreds of carved figures. And among them, next to images of angels, grapevines, and medieval symbols, suddenly, in the midst of all this, something lurks that cannot be explained within the framework of historical chronology. A stone figure of a man in a spacesuit, with a helmet, cables, and heavy boots, with eyes behind glass and hands, as if in zero gravity. This carving is known as the Astronaut of Salamanca, and it's not a myth. It's not a computer-generated image. It's not a tall tale. It's a real fresco on the cathedral's facade, visible to anyone. That's why it has become one of Europe's most talked about visual mysteries, and at the same time, one of its most controversial. The official version, voiced by the Catholic Church and local administration, is that the astronaut was added in 1992 during restoration work as a symbol of modernity, in keeping with the tradition of restoration humor. Allegedly, a restorer named Geronimo Garcia decided to preserve the signature of the era by adding a 20th century twist to the original 16th century motifs. But several inconsistencies immediately arise here. Firstly, Garcia himself died in 1991, a year before the restoration was completed. Secondly, there are no archival photographs of the cathedral's facade before the restoration that don't feature this element. And on some postcards from the late 19th century, if you zoom in, you can discern something very similar in the same place on the facade, between the wickerwork and the leaves. It's blurry, unclear, but the shape is recognizable. Secondly, the carving is too detailed to be a joke. Every element is precise. The helmet has a fixed outline and ventilation. The suit has a system of movable joints. Even the boots are depicted with characteristic grooved soles. These are not random shapes. They are recognizable and functional constructions, the likes of which were unparalleled in the 16th century. But if this is truly a 20th century addition, why did no one document the moment of its creation? Why is there not a single photograph of the process? Why did a church known for its strict restoration procedures allow this joke to remain on its sacred facade? Researchers who studied the stone on which the astronaut is carved claim that its erosion rate is no different from the surrounding rock. This means that if the figure was added later, it somehow underwent the same erosion processes in a short period of time as the older elements over centuries. This is either chemically impossible or means it is much older than official sources claim. Proponents of the extraterrestrial traces in history theory point out that similar figures, though rare, are found elsewhere, for example in Indian temples or on textiles from pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. But the Salamanca fresco is one of the clearest, most public, and most difficult to explain. It's on the facade of a building passed by hundreds of people every day. And yet, to this day, no one can say with certainty how it came to be there. One thing is clear, the astronaut's figure is real. It looks down from above onto the street where centuries blend, as if reminding us that time is not linear, and that perhaps what we call the future was once already carved in stone. The disappearance of the submarine USS Scorpion and the strange signals that preceded it. In the spring of 1968, the U.S. Navy nuclear submarine USS Scorpion, SSN 589, one of the most modern submarines of its time, disappeared in the Atlantic Ocean. She was scheduled to return to her home port in Norfolk on May 27th, but never arrived. 99 people were on board. Communication with the submarine was suddenly lost. There was no distress signal, no garbled message, no trace of her on the surface. Simply vanishing. 5 months later, in October, the submarine's hull was found at a depth of almost 3 kilometers, in an area where it shouldn't have been. It was destroyed as if by an internal explosion, but not completely disintegrated. Several compartments remained relatively intact. One of them, the command compartment, was partially open. The crew perished instantly. But why? The official version is a battery explosion that caused a chain reaction. However, a number of facts contradict this explanation. First and foremost is the last message received from the submarine 2 days before its disappearance. In it, the captain reported observing an unusual object following the submarine, without providing any specifics. It was encrypted and brief, but labeled as anomalous tracking at depth. Subsequent events only heightened suspicions. Shortly before the disappearance, NATO sonar stations in the Atlantic, in particular the SOS-US network, detected a series of sounds that still spark debate. These weren't just noises, but pulsating signals emanating from the depths. Their rhythm didn't correspond to the movements of ships, underwater volcanoes, or marine animals. 4 pulses, equal in frequency, with intervals of exactly 42 seconds. They repeated twice, and then disappeared. When the submarine was found, its hull showed dents and scratches not typical of an internal explosion. Furthermore, one of the compartments was depressurized from the inside out, but the doors to it were closed. It was as if pressure had built up in the empty space. Some researchers who gained access to satellite imagery and underwater photographs claimed that large metal fragments not belonging to the submarine were detected near the site of the sinking. This data was later classified. There are also strange coincidences. In the same year, 1968, 3 more submarines disappeared: the French Minerve, the Soviet K-129, and the Israeli Dakar, all in different parts of the world, but during the same season. Some analysts spoke of a submarine race, of failures in secret tests. But something about this coincidence seems different, as if something was happening in the ocean that defied military logic. The USS Scorpion was one of the few American submarines equipped with specialized equipment for collecting acoustic information. It carried intercept specialists on board. One of them, it was later revealed, visited a laboratory in Maryland a month before the submarine's deployment, where they discussed anomalous signals at depths greater than 2 kilometers. Many documents related to the Scorpion case remain classified. Several researchers who attempted to gain access through the Freedom of Information Act were denied access with the explanation, "in the interests of national security." And although the official commission concluded there was a technical malfunction, even military experts remain skeptical of this theory. The names of the dead are inscribed on a memorial plaque in Norfolk, but there's no date of death or coordinates, only the phrase, "sunk under the water" and "gone beyond." No one explains what this means. And the ocean, as always, remains silent. The Iranian tower that can't be photographed. On the outskirts of the Iranian city of Yazd, amid dusty plains and mud houses, rises an ancient tower known as Borj-e-Sayatun, which, translated from Farsi, can be interpreted as Tower of the Silent Clock or Tower of the Spirits. It's not very tall, standing about 15 meters. Its architecture is simple, a tapering cylinder of fired brick with carved ornamentation at the top and an arched opening at the base. But despite its apparent simplicity, something about this tower has baffled tourists, photographers, and even engineers for decades. It's impossible to photograph. More precisely, it's impossible to obtain a clear image of it. On film, on digital cameras, on satellite images, the result is always the same. The tower's image is blurry, distorted, sometimes disappearing entirely, as if it never existed at the time the photo was taken. Even stranger, the tower remains visible to the naked eye. People look at it, approach it, touch it, but try to capture the image, and the technology fails. The first documented mention of this anomaly appeared in 1957 when French ethnographer Jean-Baptiste Lang attempted to take a series of photographs of Yazd's architectural monuments. In all the images, the Borj-e-Sayatun Tower was either blurry or missing entirely. He repeated the shot at different times of day, from different angles, using different types of film. The result was the same. The neighboring buildings, trees, even the gate at the foot of the tower were reproduced perfectly. Only the tower was missing from the image. At first, this was attributed to dust, heat, and equipment defects. But in the following decades, various groups of researchers, bloggers, and journalists attempted to replicate the experiment. Some tried filming with infrared cameras, others used thermal imagers, and still others even connected spectral sensors. And each time, the tower's image would distort, blur, or disappear entirely. There were several recorded instances where the photograph was taken accidentally, out of focus, and the tower still appeared in the frame. But it was blurry, as if cut out of another layer of space. Some claim this is the result of an ancient optical illusion caused by the way the bricks used to build the tower were fired. The structure of the material supposedly reflects light in an unusual way, creating interference during digital capture. But then the question arises, why doesn't this prevent the eye from seeing it clearly? In 2008, Iran's Shiraz University conducted an experiment with synchronous filming, simultaneously from drones and from the ground, using different wavelengths. Neither image produced an accurate image. However, during the filming, one of the researchers suddenly lost his hearing for 30 seconds. No pain, no ringing, just silence. After half a minute, he regained his hearing. Medical tests revealed nothing. Locals avoid the tower. They call it a silent observer and claim that a faint glow emanates from it during the full moon. However, nothing unusual happens near the tower. Compasses work, phones receive a signal, and animals aren't alarmed by its presence. Only cameras, they don't see it. Official authorities have not commented on the phenomenon. The tower is unguarded, entry is not prohibited, and tourists can approach it directly. But hundreds of photographs taken over decades tell the same story. The closer the lens gets to the tower, the less likely it is to capture an image. It's as if the tower knows it's being watched and chooses whether to show itself or not. Hand on Mars. In February 2008, the Spirit rover exploring Gusev Planitia on the surface of Mars transmitted a series of images that became some of the most talked about in the history of NASA space missions. Among the familiar Martian landscapes, rusty red rocks, sand dunes, and fractured rock, one photograph caused immediate confusion. It depicts an object strikingly reminiscent of a human hand, not a print, not a metaphor, but a palm with a curved wrist, 5 distinct fingers, one extended phalanx, slightly raised, as if the hand were frozen in a gesture, breaking through the Martian dust. At first glance, one might chalk it all up to pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to see familiar shapes in random contours. But there was a different level of detail here. The shadow fell precisely along the line of the wrist, with the fingers casting distinct shadows. The curve of the palm matched the shape of a human hand with anatomical precision. Even NASA was unable to immediately comment on the image. The photograph quickly spread through the scientific community and the media. It was discussed not only by ufologists but also by geologists, biologists, and computer vision specialists. Some claimed it was simply a rock that had been eroded. Others noted that the rock had an excessively smooth texture and an unusual placement, as if it had been placed there rather than shaped by the wind. A few weeks later, NASA issued a clarification. The hand formation was supposedly a random geological structure, the result of wind erosion and localized sedimentation. They even proposed the term geological perceptual artifact. However, no new images of the feature were released. Furthermore, the Spirit rover soon changed its route and never returned to the area. Mission enthusiasts began examining the images manually. Some claimed that in adjacent frames taken from a different angle, the hand either disappears or appears completely different, indicating either a change in angle or something far stranger. The object could be moving or temporary. One NASA engineer, speaking anonymously, claimed that in an unpublished series of images, the object looks less and less like a rock and more like something molded. Since then, numerous photographs of controversial objects have been taken on Mars, from the skull to the head monument and the Martian woman. But the hand remains unique. Its shape, the depth of its shadow, the surface texture, everything is too similar to not raise concerns. Several independent researchers attempted to recreate the shape in 3D and compared it to a model of a human hand. The match was over 85% across key points: the phalanges, joints, and palmar curvature. Even the proportions matched adult anatomical norms. Official science remains silent. Publications about the hand have disappeared from NASA's main pages. Forum discussions are being edited. And most importantly, no one has ever returned to the area. Why? Why not photograph the object again? Why not study it from a different angle? The hand on Mars could be a trick of the light, or the remains of something we're not supposed to know about. But it was there. It was recorded. And thousands of people around the world saw it, like someone's palm pulled out from another reality. like a trace left not for us, but in spite of us. Glass skulls of Central America. Among the most enigmatic archaeological artifacts of the 20th century, a special place is occupied by the so-called crystal skulls, nearly perfect models of human skulls carved from solid quartz. They were found throughout Central America, primarily in areas associated with the ancient Mayan and Aztec cultures. Today, such skulls can be seen in the London Museum, the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, in private collections, and at exhibitions. They are real. They exist. But no one can explain how they were made. The first of these, known as the Mitchell-Hedges skull, was discovered in 1924 in the ruins of the ancient city of Lubantun in Belize. It was discovered by the archaeologist's daughter during excavations under a collapsed slab. It was a nearly anatomically perfect skull of pure quartz with perfect symmetry, a mobile lower jaw, and so transparent that light passed through it like a lens. There were no traces of modern tools, no chips, no polishing, only perfect smoothness. Later, others were discovered, less detailed, but made of the same material. Some had carved eye sockets and teeth, others were stylized, with ornamentation unknown to modern archaeology. The problem is that the technology necessary to create such objects was absent from ancient civilizations. Quartz is extremely hard. It is impossible to work it by hand without diamond tools. Even modern lasers struggle to achieve this level of precision. A study conducted in the 1970s at Hewlett-Packard Laboratories revealed that the Mitchell-Hedges skull lacked the microscopic scratches characteristic of processing. This means it had not been ground or polished in the traditional sense. Furthermore, it had been cut against the crystal's growth axis, which should have caused its fracture. But it was intact, an impossible object. Official science treated the find with suspicion. Some researchers called the skull a forgery, allegedly made in the 19th century. But other skulls, for example, specimens from museums in Mexico City and the British Museum, have a more convincing provenance. They were documented in archaeological reports and discovered in the context of a cultural layer, along with other artifacts. This rules out a later forgery. Why did ancient civilizations need such skulls? Some believe they were used in priestly rituals as mediators between worlds. Others believe they were repositories of knowledge, a kind of information crystals. There are even theories linking them to Mayan legends of 13 skulls that would reveal the truth to humanity at a time of catastrophe. One such legend, recorded during the colonial period, mentions transparent heads that hear the stars. But the mystery isn't just about the technology. Some skull owners have reported strange phenomena, a distorted perception of time, headaches, and auditory hallucinations. One researcher claimed to hear whispers in a language he didn't know inside the skull in silence. Others claim that light passing through the quartz sometimes projects patterns onto the walls, resembling writing. Crystal skulls remain a mystery, unanswered by archaeology and engineering. They are too perfect to be handmade and too ancient to be a forgery. We see them, we can photograph them, hold them in our hands, but we don't understand why, by whom, and most importantly, how. Devil's Pool off the coast of Australia. Hidden away in the heart of Queensland, near the city of Cairns, amidst tropical forests and smooth boulders, lies one of Australia's most beautiful and, at the same time, most deadly natural pools. It's called Devil's Pool. Crystal clear water, smooth slopes, rapids, and waterfalls, the place seems ideal for swimming and photography. But according to official reports, more than 20 people have died here, and unofficial reports suggest many more have disappeared without a trace. The first reported cases of drowning were recorded in the early 20th century. Young men who had no trouble swimming would suddenly sink underwater and never resurface. Witnesses claimed the bodies disappeared within seconds. Some literally did so right in front of their friends. And no one heard a scream, no splash, no struggle. It was as if something was simply pulling them in. Rescuers searched the bottom, to no avail. Sometimes the bodies were found weeks later, several kilometers downstream. Sometimes they weren't found at all. Scientists attributed everything to a strong underwater current. The basin contains a complex system of karst fissures and underwater pockets, creating a suction effect. The water here moves differently than it appears on the surface. Beneath the calm surface are traps. But even professional divers who examined the reservoir acknowledged that some pockets had no exit, but there were no bodies in them either. Cameras lowered into the deepest fissures recorded only turbidity, bubbles, and sudden temperature changes. The local Aborigines, the Udingi people, avoid this place. They call it Wakana, the place that calls. According to their legend, these rocks are inhabited by the spirit of a woman named Oguji, who lost her lover and now takes men into the water to avoid being alone. This story is passed down from generation to generation, and every element of it strangely resonates with reality. It is predominantly young men who disappear, often out-of-towners, often alone. In 2008, a tourist named James Bennett drowned in the pool. His death was captured on cameras installed by friends. He slipped, fell into the water, and disappeared. Within seconds. No lifeguard was able to find him, despite the precise location of his fall. 2 weeks later, the body surfaced, without external injuries, but with a look of horror on its face. Since then, signs have been posted. Danger zone. Do not enter, but people continue to come. The water is beckoning with its transparency. The rocks seem smooth and reliable. And then, silence. Photos of the pool are published in tourist guides. Some have superimposed light distortions. One of them, taken in 2012, shows a strange shadow underwater, elongated with a curve that doesn't resemble a natural shape. An examination of the image yielded no results. The pixels are intact and no manipulation was detected. It's simply something captured by chance. Today, Devil's Pool remains officially open to the public, but with warnings. Scientists continue to study the pool's geology, hydrodynamics, and possible underwater pockets. But even they admit there are areas that are inaccessible. Cameras refuse to work, and some devices simply disappear along with their cables, as if they were falling into the void. The place remains on the map, visible, beautiful, but come closer and you feel as if you're being watched, not with a glance but with a presence, as if the water itself is alive. And it chooses. Weeping statue of the Virgin Mary in Syracuse. At the end of August 1953, in the Italian city of Syracuse, an event occurred that became one of the most discussed religious phenomena of the 20th century. In a modest apartment on Via degli Orti, the home of a young married couple, stood a small plaster statue of the Virgin Mary. It stood about 30 centimeters tall, simple in execution, with smooth features and drooping eyes. A wedding gift. But on the morning of August 29th, the figure began to weep. Tears welled up from the statue's eyes, ran down its cheeks, formed droplets on its chin, and fell to the floor. The first to notice this was a woman named Antonietta, 8 months pregnant. She reported that she suddenly felt a headache, got out of bed, and saw moisture dripping from the statue's face. Terrified, she called her husband, then the neighbors. Over the course of several hours, more than 40 people gathered in their home. Everyone saw the same thing. The smooth plaster surface, incapable of releasing moisture, was shedding droplets chemically similar to human tears. The next day, church representatives, local doctors, chemists, and journalists arrived at the apartment. It was decided to collect the tears in test tubes and conduct an analysis. A study conducted by the Faculty of Medicine of the University of Catania confirmed that the moisture contained water, traces of sodium chloride, proteins, and enzymes consistent with human tears. No signs of forgery, tubes, or chemical reactions were found. The statue's material is ordinary plaster, porous but dry inside. The phenomenon lasted 4 days. The statue wept intermittently, sometimes a few drops an hour, sometimes in torrents. Some witnesses claimed to smell a faint scent of jasmine while crying, others a strange inner tension, as if time were being compressed. Some fell to their knees, others wept along with the statue. There were skeptics, but none could explain what was happening. The event sparked a wave of pilgrimages. Within weeks, hundreds of people flocked to Syracuse to see the statue. Authorities were forced to close the apartment, but the miracle had already spread. Photos were published in newspapers. The recordings of the tears were handed over to the Vatican. A month later, the Catholic Church officially recognized this phenomenon as inexplicable and worthy of veneration. The statue was moved to a specially built church, the Sanctuary of Our Lady of Tears. Today, it is displayed in a chapel behind glass, and thousands of believers come to it daily with prayers and requests. Scientists continue to study this phenomenon. Attempts have been made to reproduce the weeping plaster statue using temperature changes, capillary action, and hidden reservoirs. Not a single experiment has produced a result that matches the characteristics of the statue, neither the chemical composition nor the natural behavior of the droplets. No researcher has been able to explain how a plaster statue could secrete a liquid containing enzymes found only in a living organism. But perhaps something else is more important. People who were there in those days said they felt a presence, not physical, not visible, but absolutely real, as if something invisible were looking out from the depths of that small plaster figure and reflecting pain, not its own, but ours. Human pain. Stone sphere in the jungle of Costa Rica. In the dense jungles of southern Costa Rica, amidst humid vegetation and rivers, lie dozens of stone spheres whose origin remains a mystery. These monolithic spheres, scattered across the area from the mouth of the Turaba River to Coronado Bay, were first discovered in 1939 during land clearing for banana plantations. The workers came across almost perfectly shaped stone balls, partially buried in the ground, some the size of a football, others weighing several tons. What puzzled the researchers most was their geometric precision. The largest spheres reached 2.5 meters in diameter and weighed over 16 tons. Yet their shape was almost perfect. The deviations from a perfect sphere were no more than a few millimeters. And this despite the fact that they were made of hard granodiorite, a stone difficult to work even with modern tools. Who created them, when and why, no one knows. No traces of developed stone architecture, workshops, tools, or transportation systems have been found nearby. Some spheres were found in groups of 3 or 4, arranged in straight lines or geometric shapes. Some theorize that they were used as astronomical landmarks or territorial markers. Other researchers believe they served ritual purposes associated with the beliefs of pre-Columbian tribes. However, none of these theories has been definitively confirmed. The indigenous peoples living in the region do not preserve traditions about their creation. Moreover, most spheres are found far from known settlements. In the early 1950s, scientists from the National Museum of Costa Rica began a systematic study of the objects. More than 200 spheres were documented. Some were destroyed during transportation, others were taken by private collectors. Particularly odd was the fact that in some places the spheres were arranged in a strict order, arranged in triangles, parallel lines, and curves corresponding to the solar directions. This piqued the interest of archaeoastronomers, who discovered that some configurations could be linked to the position of the sun during the equinoxes and solstices. If so, this would indicate a deliberate calculation requiring precise observations and mathematical knowledge. The problem is that dating the balls is extremely difficult. The stone does not lend itself to radiocarbon dating. The only reference point is the cultural layers in which the fragments were found, from approximately 2,000 years ago to the time close to the arrival of the Spanish. This range is too broad to determine a specific culture or era. Some researchers speculate that the spheres could have been created through years of hand-rolling using fire and water, but they also acknowledge that achieving such symmetry with such methods is virtually impossible. Even with today's technology, creating dozens of stone spheres with millimeter precision is a complex and costly task. These objects can still be seen in open spaces in the Diki region. Some are on display in museums, others are right on the streets. One of the largest spheres is located on the grounds of the International Airport in San Jose. But the vast majority remain in the jungle, covered in moss, half buried in the ground, as if someone had once deliberately left them there, and then gone, without a trace, without a word. Self-propelled stone from Death Valley. In one of the most lifeless and hot places on the planet, Death Valley in southeastern California, there exists a phenomenon for which no definitive explanation has yet been found. It's a dried-up salt lake called Racetrack Playa. Its surface is flat, cracked earth, scattered with dozens, perhaps hundreds of heavy rocks. These stones, various in size, some weighing over 200 kilograms, move on their own, without the help of humans, animals, or machines. On the cracked clay, dried by the merciless sun, each of these stones leaves behind a distinct furrow. Some tracks are straight, stretching for tens of meters. Others are curved, changing direction. There are even cases where one stone seems to walk around another, as if conscious of its presence. But the strangest thing is that no one has ever witnessed the actual movement. No one has captured it in real time. The stones seem to wait while no one is looking. The first documented mention of this phenomenon dates back to the early 20th century. In 1913, geologist Joseph Kropf, surveying a dry lake bed, recorded traces of movement of stone objects weighing over 100 kilograms. He suggested that strong gusts of wind could have been the cause. However, experiments showed that even in hurricane-force winds, such heavy stones remained in place. The lake's surface is too sticky and viscous to allow sliding without significant force. Interest in the phenomenon only grew in the following decades. The first cameras were installed in the 1960s, but they yielded no results. Either the equipment malfunctioned, or they captured periods when the stones remained motionless. However, traces continued to appear. Some stones could move tens of meters in a matter of days. Moreover, the direction did not always coincide with the wind. Only in the early 2000s, after many years of observation, did a theory emerge that could at least somewhat explain what was happening. According to it, on rare nights when the temperature drops sharply, a thin crust of ice, no more than a few millimeters thick, forms on the surface of the salt lake. Under the influence of wind and the melting water layer beneath, rocks can indeed begin to slide. However, many conditions must be met: specific humidity, wind direction, precise ice thickness, and slope angle. These conditions occur extremely rarely, once every few years. Yet, even this theory doesn't explain everything. Some stones move along paths that can't be explained by aerodynamics. Some change direction several times in a short distance. There are cases where two identical stones, lying side by side, leave tracks in opposite directions, or when the track breaks off halfway and the stone seems to vanish. Scientists are still debating whether this phenomenon can be considered fully understood, or whether it's just part of a more complex mechanism we haven't yet figured out. People who have visited Racetrack Playa describe a strange sensation, as if everything around them has gone silent. The air doesn't move, the earth doesn't breathe, but at the same time, you understand. Something is happening, without sound, without warning, and only in the morning, in the sun, can you see. One of the stones is no longer where it was yesterday, and its mark is like the desert signature, or a reminder that even stones sometimes move. Tower without entrance in India. On the outskirts of the Indian state of Karnataka, among forested hills covered with mango trees and vines, rises a strange structure known to locals as Mukha Stapa, the Faceless Tower. It is an octagonal stone structure, approximately 24 meters tall, composed of massive blocks of gray granite. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary defensive tower or an ancient observation post. But the closer you get, the clearer the main paradox becomes. The tower has no doors, no windows, no entrance, no stairs, no openings. None. According to satellite images, the tower is completely hollow inside. At its center is a hollow space, approximately 8 meters in diameter, stretching from the base to the very top. This was established using ground-penetrating radar and echolocation conducted by researchers from the Bangalore Institute of Architecture. But getting inside is impossible. All the outer walls are smooth, without protrusions or openings. Not a single slab hints at a hidden door, neither above nor below. The tower's age is uncertain. Archaeologists estimate it was built no later than the 11th century. However, it is not mentioned in the ancient chronicles of local temples. It seems to have vanished from history, appearing without a trace of construction, without a legend, without a purpose. The region boasts numerous Hindu temples, palaces, and towers, each with its own name and history. But not this one. The first attempts to study the tower date back to the early 20th century. In 1928, British researchers from the Colonial Archaeological Society took measurements, described the structure, and concluded that the tower was constructed using the principle of dead volume, that is, an interior space that is inaccessible. At the time, it was explained as an architectural error or a symbolic design. But nearly 100 years have passed since then, and no new theory has come close to solving the mystery. Interestingly, magnetic sensors installed at the base of the tower detect slight fluctuations in the magnetic field, minor but constant. Some scientists speculate that there may be a metal object or structure inside that generates a weak electromagnetic field. However, getting inside to verify this is impossible. Neither drilling nor laser sensors yielded results. Furthermore, one attempt to scan the interior in 1991 resulted in a strange equipment failure. The data was unreadable, as if the tower's interior contained noise rather than emptiness. Locals approach the tower with caution. Some avoid it, claiming a quiet hum like a low vibration can be heard emanating from it at night. Others believe the tower is an air tomb, built by the ancients as a seal over something that should not be released. There are also more benign legends. Supposedly, a library of ancient knowledge is hidden within, inaccessible by ordinary means. Or that it is a receiver of star voices, built in an era when the gods still walked the earth. There's no scientific evidence to support these theories. But there is one fact. The tower stands. It's cracked and covered in moss and lichen, but it's not crumbling. And most importantly, to this day, it remains inaccessible, as if it wasn't built to be entered, but to hold something inside. A grave that is covered with frost once a year. In southern Spain, in the hot and dry province of Jaén, amid olive groves and white houses, lies the small cemetery of San Miguel, no different from hundreds of others. Even rows of tombstones, cypress trees, stone crosses. But in the very center, against the wall of an old church, lies a grave that, every year, on the same morning, June 21st, is covered in frost. The air temperature is above 25 degrees Celsius. This grave belongs to a woman named Isabel Gómez de Tobar, who died in 1896. Her tombstone is simple, a rectangular slab of gray limestone with hand-carved letters. No sculptures, decorations, or symbols. But every summer solstice, early in the morning, when the entire earth is still immersed in a sultry calm, her tombstone is covered in a thin, sparkling crust of frost, as if the breath of winter had passed over only one spot. The first recorded observation dates back to 1932, when a local priest described the phenomenon in his parish chronicle. He noted that frost appeared on one grave, despite the hot night, and lasted for almost 2 hours. Since then, residents, passers-by, and visitors have recounted the phenomenon. Some considered it a myth, others a joke. But with the development of photography and video, the phenomenon began to be documented. And each time, there's confirmation. Exactly once a year, only at dawn, Isabel's tombstone becomes covered in frost. Only it. Neither the surrounding grass nor the neighboring slabs change. Only one. Scientists involved in the study attempted to find a rational explanation. The theory of capillary moisture and surface cooling at night failed to hold water. Nearby tombstones made of the same material show no such evidence. The surface temperature of the stove, as measured by infrared sensors, drops to 0 degrees Celsius when frost forms, compared to an ambient temperature of around 27 degrees Celsius. This cannot be explained without an external source of cold. But there isn't one. Hypotheses were put forward regarding geothermal activity, cracks in the ground, and evaporation of groundwater. But geologists found no evidence of any of these factors. The burial site is not distinguished by soil structure or moisture content. The only difference is the orientation of the slab. It is slightly offset from the others, as if shifted by a few degrees. But how this could cause regular cooling is unknown. Some researchers have attempted to link this to the specific date. June 21st is the summer solstice. On this morning, the sun rises at its highest point on the horizon, casting a shadow in a unique arc. One theory is that on this day, the angle of light hits the slab at a specific angle, activating some hidden process. But then it's unclear why this effect is accompanied by actual physical cooling rather than just a visual distortion. There's also a local legend. Isabel, in life, saved several children from death in the river and froze to death while pulling the last one out. She was nicknamed the White Mother, unofficially, and some believe the frost on the slab is gratitude from the water, or from memory, or from something beyond our control. Every year at dawn on June 21st, several dozen people gather at the grave to watch the air shimmer with heat and the slab become covered in a white breath. Silently, without explanation. And perhaps it is precisely in this second, between night and day, between light and heat, that something is revealed that remains hidden from all other days of the year. The indestructible mummy of San Bernardo. In a high valley in the Cundinamarca department, near the city of San Bernardo, Colombia, lies a small cemetery that has become the site of one of South America's strangest and least studied anomalies. Here, in ordinary concrete vaults, lie dozens of bodies, barely decomposed since death. They weren't embalmed, they weren't prepared for mummification. But decades later, when relatives came to rebury the remains, the bodies lay almost intact before them. The first known evidence dates back to the late 1960s. A family opening a crypt 20 years after the death of a relative discovered his body virtually intact. The skin was wrinkled but intact, the facial features were recognizable, and the hair and nails were preserved. Over time, such cases became more and more common. Relatives began preserving the bodies in a special room at the cemetery. This is how the San Bernardino Mummy Museum was born, a small pavilion where dozens of bodies, preserved without refrigeration or chemicals, are displayed under glass. Scientists have attempted to explain this phenomenon. One of the first theories is a special microclimate. San Bernardo is located at an altitude of approximately 2,000 meters above sea level. The air here is relatively dry, cool, and has a constant wind. All of this could have contributed to the natural dehydration of bodies. But even taking these factors into account, mummification of this quality is extremely rare. Furthermore, nothing similar has been recorded in other cemeteries in the region. Other theories relate to the locals' diet. San Bernardino is known for its abundance of fruits and vegetables, especially guanabana and passion fruit. Some researchers have suggested that certain substances contained in these fruits may accumulate in tissues and slow down their decomposition. However, no scientific evidence has yet been found to support this hypothesis. Local residents regard the phenomenon with both respect and concern. Some believe it's a blessing of the land, while others believe the dead are not being released. One cemetery caretaker said, "We're just tending to them," and they lie there as if they've just fallen asleep. Indeed, some mummies look remarkably alive. The body of a little girl who died at the age of 7 is particularly eerie. Her skin has darkened but remains smooth, her eyes are closed, and her hair is neatly styled. It seems she's simply sleeping. Attempts to transport the bodies to other museums or laboratories have met with protests. Local residents believe mummies should remain where they were born. Furthermore, some families bring gifts, flowers, and even food to the bodies. It is believed that the souls of the deceased remain present in their bodies and should not be disturbed. But most importantly, the bodies haven't dried out to the bone. They retain soft tissue, muscles, and contours. And yet, there's no odor or sign of decay. Some of the mummies have been preserved for over 50 years and remain virtually intact. Today, the museum is open to everyone. Tourists come to witness this astonishing phenomenon. Scientists come to document its parameters. But no one can say why here, why these particular bodies, and how long these walls will preserve the memory that even nature itself has been unable to erase. The surviving library from Topkapi after the explosion and fire. In the very heart of Istanbul, on a promontory between the Bosphorus and the Golden Horn, stands Topkapi Palace, the residence of the Ottoman sultans for 4 centuries. It's not just an architectural monument, but a world unto itself. Courtyards, chambers, treasuries, kitchens, a harem, and of course, a library. It's considered one of the quietest and most forgotten parts of the complex. It's not on display, not adorned with gold, but it was within these walls that some of the most ancient and rare manuscripts in the Islamic world were kept. And it was this very manuscript that survived something that should have destroyed it completely. On the night of August 9th to 10th, 1943, an explosion occurred in the palace courtyard. The official explanation was a gas leak in a closed kitchen gallery. The explosion caused a fire that quickly spread throughout the complex. The flames engulfed the northern halls and wooden ceilings, and according to eyewitnesses, the heat melted the lead from the domes. Panic was rife. The palace was guarded, but there were virtually no firefighting equipment. Part of the collection, especially the books, was in danger. The library was located near the site of the explosion. With its wooden ceiling and a multitude of papers, carpets, and manuscripts, it seemed like the fire's first casualty. But when the fire was contained 3 hours later, a strange thing was discovered. The library had suffered almost no damage. The smoke penetrated, but the fire did not. The ceiling did not collapse. The walls were intact, and most amazingly, the manuscripts remained dry, not sooty, not warped. Even the window panes, for some reason, did not burst, although the bronze in the adjacent room had melted. Historians later studied this phenomenon. The first explanation was fortunate location. Supposedly, the library's design provided ventilation that protected against fire. However, architects refuted this theory. There were no special firefighting technologies in this hall. Moreover, the library has 2 wooden entrances, neither of which was blocked up. A sea breeze, on the contrary, would have fanned the flames. But even the carpets in the corners remained untouched. A more mystical version says that the library was blessed by the blessing of the pen, one of the symbolic elements of Ottoman architecture, integrated into the design of the hall. We're talking about a fresco depicting a pen touching a drop of ink, a symbol of knowledge and the protection of writing. It was this fresco, according to one of the guards, that glowed crimson at the moment of the explosion. It sounds fantastic, but many believe the library didn't burn because it couldn't. It shouldn't have. The library's collection includes over 8,000 manuscripts, scientific treatises, poems, the Quran, medical texts, geographical maps, and books on navigation. Some of them date back to the 12th century. They are hand-bound, decorated with gold, and illuminated with natural colors. The loss of this collection would be a tragedy not only for Turkey, but for the entire historical heritage of Islamic culture. After the fire, the library was temporarily closed. The books were sorted, cleaned, and redocumented. Fire reports remained extremely guarded. The fire's impact was minimal, defying any technical explanation. No one could reliably explain why everything that should have burned within minutes remained intact at the epicenter of the disaster. Today, the library is open to researchers. Admission is limited, but every year, hundreds of historians, calligraphers, and Orientalists gain access to texts that have survived war, fire, and time. Sometimes the room smells faintly of burning, a reminder. But the books remain in their places, and the light through the antique glass falls upon the pages just as it did centuries ago. Fresco of the Mushroom Jesus in France. In the French commune of Plantazur, in a small church hidden among the hills of Provence, there is a fresco that has long attracted little attention. The darkened plaster, the rough style, the crumbling lines. It dates back to approximately the 13th century and is considered one of many religious scenes decorating the walls of provincial churches. But in the early 1980s, German ethnobotanist Karl Ruck noticed it, and from that moment on, the silence surrounding the image ended. Because the fresco, he claimed, depicted not just any Jesus. It depicted Jesus standing beneath a giant mushroom, the central figure. Christ is depicted in the familiar iconographic style, with a halo, wearing a long robe, and with his hand raised. But behind him is neither a cross nor a tree. Instead, there's something resembling a tall mushroom with a thick stem and a wide cap. The cap's surface is covered with a pattern reminiscent of scales. Jesus holds two small cups in his hands, and around his head are red curls resembling spores or smoke. This fresco has been the subject of controversy. Some believed it was simply a stylized depiction of a tree or cloud. Others believed the artist was attempting to depict the tree of knowledge symbolically. But there was also a third group of researchers, ethnomycologists, proponents of the theory of ritualistic use of psychoactive mushrooms in early Christianity. They argued that the image was a code, an encrypted message about a sacred drink or a revelation received through an altered state of consciousness. Similar motifs are indeed found in early religious art. In some Byzantine miniatures, for example, figures of the apostles stand next to mushroom-like plants. In India and Persia, symbols of the sacred mushroom, possibly psilocybin or amanita, are also known. But in France, such images are rare. For a long time, local authorities did not intervene. The church was dilapidated, the fresco barely visible, and only enthusiasts photographed it, made sketches, and attempted to restore the paint. But in 2006, the French Commission for Cultural Heritage carried out a restoration of the building. The fresco was cleaned, fixed, and coated with a protective coating. And now the debate has flared up again, because after the restoration, the details became more clearly visible. The mushroom proved more than convincing. The cap's capital has a dotted pattern, characteristic of the fly agaric. The stem is not branched like a tree's, but straight with a thickening at the base. Some areas of the cap hint at droplets or dew, enhancing the mushroom-like appearance. There are no leaves, roots, or fruits, just one large vertical object. The church hasn't commented on these finds. But tourists have increased. People are coming from all over the world to see for themselves what it is: a mushroom, a tree, an ancient allegory, or a deliberate attempt to convey what was forbidden to be spoken openly. Psychologists and historians of religion point out that even if we accept that the artist depicted a mushroom, this does not necessarily indicate a connection with psychoactive substances. Perhaps it represents an ancient symbol lost over the centuries. Perhaps the artist was inspired by local legends, or perhaps he was simply trying to convey something he saw in a vision or dream. Nevertheless, the fresco has gone down in history as an icon that cannot be explained in a single word. It combined fear, knowledge, and the power of the image. Even today, standing before this image, many feel not just aesthetic interest, but an almost unsettling silence, as if the wall itself holds something that must not be forgotten, only understood one day. The basalt organ in Northern Ireland, a stone harmony of nature or a trace of ancient intelligence? On the north coast of County Antrim, in a part of Ireland where cliffs plunge abruptly into the frigid sea, lies one of Europe's most enigmatic natural formations. It's called the Giant's Causeway, a stretch of coastal cliffs composed of hexagonal stone columns. There are more than 40,000 of them. All of them are almost perfectly straight, tightly fitted together, as if cast and placed by the hands of titans. Some are up to 12 meters tall, and among them one piece stands out in particular, the so-called basalt organ. This cluster of vertical columns, shaped like a church organ, is densely packed, each with a distinctly faceted structure. When wind or rain hits and water flows down them at a specific rhythm, it creates the illusion of sound, a hum, a vibration, an almost musical rhythm, as if the stones themselves were responding to the movement of the air. Tourists standing at the foot of the mountain sometimes claim to hear the rock sing. This effect is not recorded in any official source, but it is mentioned by dozens of eyewitnesses. Geologists explain the origin of the columns simply. A powerful eruption occurred here about 50 million years ago. The lava that filled the basin slowly cooled, and through crystallization and compression, columns with a characteristic hexagonal shape were formed. However, not everyone agrees. Some researchers point out that the excessively high degree of symmetry, the extremely dense packing, and the almost complete absence of deviations, all of this goes beyond the limits of a random natural formation. Furthermore, no crater of the corresponding size has been found nearby. Interestingly, in Irish folklore, the Giant's Causeway has since ancient times been considered a construction by the Titan Finn McCool, a mythical warrior who wanted to cross the sea and built a bridge to Scotland. Indeed, in Scotland, on the island of Staffa, there are similar basalt columns. They are called Giant's Fingers. It appears that a geological mirror exists between the two countries, as if two parts of a single structure had one day split apart. But while the columns in Scotland are disorderly, in Ireland they are organized, especially in the section housing the organ. It seems built not for strength, but for beauty and harmony. Some columns even curve, forming waves, as if frozen in motion. Scientists have attempted to recreate such forms in laboratories. They succeeded in achieving a similar structure through controlled cooling of lava, but only at a level of a few centimeters. Creating columns as tall as a man or more is currently impossible without engineering intervention. But here, tens of thousands of them. Dense, even, without chipping. Moreover, magnetic sensors in the area of the organ show subtle anomalies, deviations in the magnetic field, barely perceptible but consistent. This has sparked a wave of theories about a possible resonance of the stones, suggesting that the shape of the columns creates certain wave vibrations that are inaudible to the ear but affect perception. Some tourists describe a slight dizziness or a strange sensation of silence inside the ears when standing at the very foot of the structure. Today, the Giant's Causeway is protected as a World Heritage Site. Access to the organ is open, but restricted for conservation purposes. Yet, anyone standing at the foot of these stone pipes feels as if they've entered a temple where sound comes not from a voice, but from the earth itself. And in this silence, something ancient can be heard, something that doesn't need to be explained, just felt. A fountain that works without pressure is the secret of the Andinsky village. In the Chilean province of Elqui, at an altitude of almost 2,000 meters above sea level, the small village of Peñaflor is hidden among the hills. A device that baffles engineers still operates there. In the center of the village stands a fountain, built according to locals in the 19th century. It's not connected to a pump or a pressurized tank. But the water shoots out of it almost 2 meters into the air, evenly, steadily, and without interruption, and no one can explain exactly how it works. The fountain consists of a stone pedestal, a small circular basin, and a single pipe rising vertically. At first glance, it seems like a simple design, but upon closer inspection, more questions arise than answers. The basin always contains sufficient water. The stream never weakens, day or night. It doesn't stop even during droughts. Moreover, the village has no centralized water supply, and the nearest source is a spring located a kilometer up the slope. In the early 2000s, Chilean hydraulic engineers took an interest in this phenomenon. They took measurements, checked the water composition and pressure, and discovered that water was indeed being supplied without additional pressure. The measured pressure in the pipe did not exceed atmospheric pressure, and the water column was insufficient to create such a pressure. Moreover, when specialists attempted to temporarily shut off the flow by shutting off the pipe, the fountain not only stopped working, but also restored itself within a few hours without any intervention. Locals claim the fountain has never dried up in the last 150 years, even when the spring above was nearly dry. Moreover, the water from the fountain remains cool and clear year-round. Given the region's droughts and extreme temperature fluctuations, this seems impossible. Some researchers have suggested that the slope may conceal an ancient system of reservoirs and canals, possibly dating back to before colonial times. This hypothesis is not without foundation. 16th century archives during the Spanish colonization mention a stone water miracle in the Elqui Mountains. However, there are no precise descriptions. Attempts to conduct a ground-penetrating radar scan of the area encountered technical problems. The signal was reflected too weakly, suggesting there were cavities or porous rock underground. Several changes in the magnetic background were also recorded near the fountain, which, according to geophysicists, may indicate the presence of underground chambers with an unusual structure. However, there are no technical drawings, diagrams, or piping that explain how this system maintains its flow without pressure. Perhaps a hidden gravity feed is used, but then it would have to be built with perfect precision to maintain a constant flow over decades. And yet, not a single villager can say for sure who built the fountain or when. According to legend, it was built by an unnamed engineer, either a monk or a fugitive Spaniard, who knew the secret of water. Today, the fountain has become a local shrine. It is not repaired, dismantled, or touched. Flowers grow around it, children play, and tourists toss coins. Scientists still debate whether such a system could function without pumps. Or are we looking at a lost piece of hydraulics recreated by someone who understood the terrain better than modern specialists? One engineer leaving the village said, "The fountain doesn't work. It just flows. And that's where its power lies." Fossilized foot in boot, Texas's impossible find. In the small town of Holloway, Texas, a local history museum displays an exhibit under a glass dome that evokes awe, disbelief, and anxiety all at once. It's a piece of dense limestone within which lies a clearly visible human foot. A foot, an ankle, part of a calf. Everything looks as if it were carved from stone. But the strangest thing is that the foot is shod in a leather boot, typical of the mid-20th century. And all of it is petrified, a single monolith, as if the man had been caught in the moment and imprinted in the rock like an insect in amber. The story of the discovery begins in the summer of 1976. Two amateur geologists were exploring quarries south of the city and discovered an unusual fragment of rock protruding from a layer of clay. One of them struck the piece with a hammer, cracking it, revealing a footprint inside. At first glance, the boot appeared to have been melted, but inside was a bone structure visible on X-ray. The police were called, then local archaeologists, but a week later, the find was handed over to the museum as anomalous. It became known as the Holloway Boot. The most astonishing thing about this artifact is its juxtaposition of time periods. Geological analysis revealed that the limestone surrounding the Butte dates back to deposits approximately 10,000 years ago. This contradicts all known data. After all, the Butte itself is a standard leather one with metal studs and a rubber sole. Analysis of the materials revealed that the skin had indeed undergone mineralization, but was originally organic. The remains inside were fragments of bone tissue, partially fossilized, but retaining their structure. This means this isn't just a figurine or a craft, it's a real foot inside a real boot, embedded in a layer of stone that's tens of centuries old. Skeptics, of course, tried to disprove the authenticity. Some claimed the petrification was artificial, caused by a chemical reaction in the soil. Others claimed the age of the rock had been miscalculated. However, samples were sent to various labs, from Texas universities to independent experts. In all cases, one thing was confirmed. The organic matter inside was human. The shoes were modern. The mineralization was uniform. The layer was ancient. Hypotheses have emerged about possible tectonic activity, faults, and soil subsidence that could have pulled more modern objects into the ancient sediments. But none of them explain how the Butte ended up completely surrounded by dense rock, with no traces of penetration or cavities. It's as if the rock formed immediately around it. Some proponents of alternative archaeology claim this is evidence not only of anomalous fossilization, but also of time lapses. That a person walking on Texas soil in the 20th century found themselves caught in a rift in time and frozen in a layer they shouldn't have been part of. Or, as more radical researchers have put it, this is a trace of long-existing reboots of civilization, when fragments of technology and bodies are accidentally preserved in the bowels of the earth, even surviving catastrophes. Official science doesn't accept any of these theories. But the fact remains, the exhibit is in a museum, it's open for viewing, and numerous experts have confirmed its physical integrity. It hasn't been explained away. It hasn't been faked. It simply is. Locals call it a step through time. And perhaps that's the most accurate description. After all, what we're dealing with isn't so much a mystery of anatomy or geology as it is a question about the very concept of time. Can it be so dense that it can turn to stone in a single second? Libya's glass desert is a scorched memory of an ancient sky. In the very center of the Libyan desert, on the border between Egypt and Libya, in one of the most inhospitable and inaccessible regions of the planet, lies an area covered in a strange material, green and yellow glass scattered among the sands, like traces of some ancient, forgotten fire. These aren't just quartz shards. They're Libyan desert glass, chemically almost identical to modern high-purity silicate glass. But its origin remains a subject of debate, speculation, and troubling conjecture. Fragments of this glass were first discovered in the early 20th century by British geologists, but locals had known about it even earlier. Bedouins called these stones stones of light and used them for jewelry. The scientific community became interested in the material after Patrick Clay's expedition in 1922 presented a collection of samples, each of which looked like a piece of molten green quartz, shimmering in the sun. The most astonishing thing is the purity of the material. The glass contains virtually no impurities. It consists almost entirely of silicon dioxide. The temperature required to create such a material exceeds 2,000 degrees Celsius. And yet, there are no volcanoes in the area. No industrial facilities capable of melting the sand have ever existed here. Two main theories have emerged among scientists. The first is that it is the result of a meteorite impact. The impact of a body of enormous mass and velocity generates energy capable of melting the Earth's surface. However, no craters have been found in the glass zone. There is no clear impact crater, no residual structures, only a smooth layer of glass extending for tens of kilometers. The second theory is an airburst. Just as the Tunguska meteorite struck Siberia in 1908, igniting the air at altitude and melting forests, a similar incident could have occurred here. The uniform distribution of glass and the absence of large craters support this hypothesis. However, the question remains, why here, and why were the temperatures so high? There's a third, far more disturbing hypothesis, voiced by only a few experts. In 1993, a Chicago scientist compared Libyan glass samples with samples collected at a nuclear test site in the Nevada desert. He claimed that the structural density, crystallization rate, and shape of the bubbles within the glass were identical to those of glass formed in the zone of a thermonuclear explosion. If this is true, then something comparable in power to an atomic detonation occurred in Libya thousands of years ago. This hypothesis generated a wealth of speculation. There was talk of ancient civilizations, of the weapons of the gods, of sand wars reflected in legends and texts. Mention was made of fire from heaven, described in Egyptian chronicles. Moreover, one of the most mysterious artifacts, a scarab inlaid with a piece of this glass found among the treasures of Tutankhamun, directly links glass to ancient Egypt. But whatever happened in this desert, it left behind only one thing: glass. Stones that cannot be burned, destroyed, or erased. Their shape is the mark of instantaneous melting. Their color is the imprint of heat incomparable to wildfires. Their silence is all that remains of an event that should have wiped out all life within a radius of many miles. Today, the Glass Desert is an open-air museum, a place where you can walk on the sand, knowing that beneath your feet lies something that has survived something unimaginable. In this silence lies a memory of how the sky once sank too low, and the earth melted at its touch. Baghdad Battery, electricity before electricity. In 1938, during excavations on the outskirts of Baghdad, archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig discovered an object that continues to stir controversy and challenges our understanding of the technological development of the ancient world. It was an ordinary clay vessel, about 15 centimeters tall. Inside was a copper cylinder soldered with bitumen with an iron rod in the center. Scientists later discovered that the design resembled a primitive galvanic cell. If vinegar, wine, or lemon juice were poured inside, a weak electric current would be generated. This vessel, later dubbed the Baghdad Battery, was not an isolated find. Several similar objects, varying in size but using the same design principles, were discovered in neighboring areas. All date back to approximately the 3rd century BCE, long before the official discovery of electricity. This raises the question, if these are indeed batteries, who used them and why? The most popular hypothesis is its use in galvanics. Scientists have experimentally proven that by connecting a wire to an iron rod and dipping a metal object in a solution containing copper ions, it can be coated with a thin layer of gold or silver. Thus, the battery could have been used by jewelers to apply decorative coatings. This would explain the exquisite fineness of the engraving on some artifacts of that era, too perfect for hand tools. However, no archaeological evidence of the direct use of such techniques in Mesopotamia has been found. Not a single jewelry table, not a single description in Sumerian or Assyrian texts mentions artificial gilding using electricity. Therefore, this is merely a guess. The second theory is cult-like. Some researchers suggest that electric current was used in rituals, for example, to deliver a mild shock when touching sacred objects. This could have evoked a sense of wonder in the priest or believer, a confirmation of the object's power. This is especially true given that Sumerian texts mention thunderbolts and illuminated vessels. But even if we dismiss the mystical theories, the question remains: how can we explain the ancient people's knowledge of electrolytes, electrodes, and circuit closure? Perhaps they didn't understand the nature of electricity, but they exploited its effects, just as the Chinese used magnets 1,000 years before magnetism was explained. However, the manufacture of such vessels requires precision, the right shape, the right insulator, and metal components. This is no accident. Some scholars completely reject the electrical hypothesis. They believe the vessels are ordinary containers for storing parchment or scrolls, and the metal elements inside are fasteners or handles. However, it remains unclear why a copper cylinder would be inserted into a clay vessel, insulated with bitumen, and an iron rod would be positioned precisely in the center. Such a design is excessive for a simple container. In 1999, the German National Geographic Institute conducted a series of experiments with exact replicas of the Baghdad vessels. Inside them, they were able to generate a current of between 0.5 and 2 volts. This is enough to cause a slight tingling sensation when touched, or, as tests showed, to ignite a small copper thread. Today, one of the original vessels is kept in the Iraqi National Museum. The rest are in private and university collections. Their condition is precarious. After the war, some of the exhibits disappeared. But the mystery remains. The Baghdad Battery is more than just an artifact. It's a challenge, not so much to science, but to our understanding of who lived and how 2,000 years ago. And if they truly knew how to extract energy from liquid and metal, perhaps we aren't the first to hold lightning in our hands. The Weeping Idol is a Mexican stone that provides water in the most drought-prone times. In the highland state of Oaxaca, deep in an ancient protected forest, archaeologists have discovered an object revered by local indigenous peoples since time immemorial. It is a stone statue, approximately 1.5 meters tall, roughly carved from black volcanic tuff. She has rounded shoulders, a massive head, and arms clasped across her chest. Her face is worn away, but empty eye sockets and deep claw-like furrows running from her eyes to her chin are visible. It's called the Crying Idol, and not just because of its shape. The stone actually cries. In the hottest, driest weather, drops of moisture slowly trickle down its surface. The first scientific description of the object appeared in 1974, when Mexican archaeologists were conducting work in the area of an ancient Zapotec settlement. One of their guides, an old man from a local tribe, led them to a rock where a figure stood half buried in the ground. The ground around it was damp, even though everything around it was cracked by the heat. The next day, they attempted to examine the sculpture and noticed droplets of water, similar to condensation, forming around the eyes and neck. But the air temperature that day was over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity was minimal. Since then, the Weeping Idol has been the subject of study. Scientists have taken water samples. It was found to be fresh, free of salts and organic impurities. No reservoirs or voids capable of retaining moisture were found within the stone. Moreover, the material from which the figure is carved has extremely low hygroscopicity. It is incapable of absorbing water, much less releasing it slowly. The hypothesis that the idol absorbs moisture during the wet season and then releases it in the summer has not been confirmed. Such properties are not typical of this type of volcanic rock. Some have suggested that moisture seeps from underground and trickles down the surface. However, the area around the idol's base is always dry, and drops only begin to appear at the height of the face and chest. Sometimes they flow downwards, sometimes they remain as droplets, as if they had just emerged from within. Locals believe the stone is connected to rain spirits. According to legend, when the earth calls for water, the idol weeps, and a cloud appears a few days later. This coincidence has been recorded several times. After the idol's tears, rain began, despite a consistently dry forecast. The phenomenon impressed researchers so much that they set up weather stations, recording the slightest changes. No pressure, temperature, or precipitation levels that could explain the humidity were detected. More mystical versions have also emerged, that the idol was carved from stone that had been subjected to ancient high-temperature exposure and microscopic capillaries remained in its structure. Or perhaps mysterious physical and chemical processes related to ancient rituals and the blood of sacrifices are still at work within it. Archaeologists found traces of ash, ceramics, shells, and bones at its base. Perhaps the idol was indeed part of a sacrificial altar. Today, the crying idol is protected as part of the region's intangible heritage. It's not fenced off, but it's revered. Tourists come to see the stone deity dripping with water, as if the earth itself, through the mouth of an ancient, is silent but unable to hold back its tears. Because it's not the idol that's crying, it's what we've forgotten. These stories contain more than just facts and discoveries, but the whispers of deep memory, fused with fear, knowledge, and the unspoken. Earth, stone, metal, and silence all speak to us in a language we've almost forgotten. We may never know the whole truth. But peering into the cracks of the ancient, we hear the same thing every time. The world is much older, deeper, and more alive than our minds allow us to acknowledge.